All right, welcome everybody to the third edition of our How It Works series, hosted by the Black Biomechanists Association and the ASB Postdoc Affinity group. We are happy to bring you another session where we have our expert panels explain the ins and outs of research and how it works to be a professional researcher. So this week or today, we are going to be talking about building a research team. Right. So a couple of times ago, we talked about getting your lab funded, and now if you have your funding for your lab, you need people to help you do the research, and we're going to talk about how you do that. Right. So my name is Kayla. I'm a second year postdoc at the University of Southern California, and my co-host is Riddhi.
Hi everyone, I'm Riddhi. I am also a postdoc at Northwestern University.
Great. And then we have our lovely panelists, and I'll just go in the order that I have them here. And panelists, if you can say your little intros, but then also at the end, kind of maybe adding on to this, how your lab is currently structured in terms of how many students, postdocs, undergrads, that kind of thing. And if there's anything else relevant that you think you want to add on to that. So I have Diego here first.
All right, so I'm Diego Ferreira. I'm at Lander University in South Carolina. Excuse me. So my lab is relatively small. It's made up mostly of undergraduate students. And so most of the students I work with are usually junior level or senior level, but we do get some first year and second year students who also show some interest as well.
Great. And next I have Stephanie.
Hi everyone, I'm Stephanie Cohn. I'm an assistant professor in biomedical engineering at the University of Delaware. I'm currently starting my fourth year as faculty, and my lab is currently 5 PhD students and a postdoc. And I guess of note, and those are all spread out like one or two per year, effectively, we bring people in. And maybe of note, I work really closely with a lab over in physical therapy, so Karin Silbernagel's lab. And together we tend to run about 12 to 15 people between visiting researchers, postdocs, that type of thing. So I'd say we function in a much larger group setting in terms of project management.
Great. Then we have you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Yusong. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, great. All right. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Health, Sports, and Exercise Science at the University of Kansas. Currently, my lab has 2 doctoral students, and I'm in my third year. They both are second year doctoral students. And then I have a master student currently. One master student graduated last year. And we do have a large group of undergrad students. Most of them are in their junior year, senior year, and some freshmen as well. Number was likely about 10 students, consistently helping with some data collections. I do not have postdoc, so that's kind of my lab here. Yep, thank you.
Great. And last but not least, we have James.
Good afternoon for, I guess, most people here. My name is James Finley. I'm an associate professor in the Division of Biokinesiology and Physical Therapy at USC. I also have appointments in the neuroscience graduate program and in biomedical engineering. So I've been in this position for now almost 13 years. So my lab has gone through several stages. I'll just highlight one of the biggest changes that's happened recently. So last spring, I had 5 students defend PhDs. So that was quite hectic, and we can talk about that if you'd like. And as a result, I've basically downsized the lab quite a bit since then. So I currently have 2 PhD students, 1 postdoc, 3 master students, and we typically also have 2, maybe 3 undergraduate students who stay for summer research opportunities. So yeah, happy to discuss lab management at different career phases as we progress.
Yeah, awesome. And it's good. And we like to have like a broad range of what people have in terms of the structure. And so luckily our panel of people have all different types of structures. So we can have some good question and discussion about that. All right. So we're going to get to the moderated questions now. Riddhi, do you want to take the first one?
Yeah, that sounds great. All right, so Hi, everyone. So our first question we wanted to start with was if you could describe your strategy for hiring your first person in your laboratory. So the type of hire, whether it was an undergraduate student, PhD, master's, postdoc, or staff, and then the kind of types of research you had them start working on, like immediate grants or more pilot work. And so we can start off maybe with Diego.
Okay, so as I mentioned, my lab is kind of small, so we don't really have a lot of hiring to do. So we mostly just recruit undergraduate students to participate in research. And a lot of the times it's through um, either student interest, they may have a idea about a research project that they maybe want to do, or luckily we've had from our women's soccer team kind of just like this what seems to be a factory just assembly line of someone who's a junior or senior has a teammate that is in their like sophomore year, and so we just kind of like slowly pull them in to say, hey, you should do research too. And then we just kind of have been going through that cycle. Since we have a lot of students that are athletes in our department, we tend to see a lot of students have a just general interest in biomechanics from either an injury standpoint or a performance standpoint. So our hiring is mostly just recruitment of students who are interested in participating in research.
Awesome, thank you. We can just go in the same order as last time for this question. So, Stephanie.
Sure. Yeah, so I guess kind of the initial approach, I guess it's probably important to note I started off cycle, so I delayed my start from an August start to a January. Essentially, I had a lot of equipment I knew would take a long time to get in and get set up. And I wanted to recruit my own students, which was also super helpful. So the first 6 months that I was in place, I was mostly just managing things kind of on my own, managing renovations and stuff. Kayla will know this very well. I was also working closely with people in Karin's group, Kayla specifically, to get some of our equipment up and running and some of the collaborative projects that we've started since then. So my first hires were two PhD students that started the August about 6 or 8 months after I started as faculty. I intentionally recruited them into the first two big project lines that I knew I would be submitting grants for. I basically wanted to make sure I had people that I could train in well to run experiments and really work through getting preliminary data for submissions, that type of thing. Since that point, I've been adding 1 to 2 people every year, just kind of building up all of those areas. Basically, as funding comes in, I'm bringing in more people to support the project work. But that was my general approach.
Great, thank you. Next, you.
So my first hiring experience kind of got a little lucky. I had a master student, and she did her undergraduate student at the University of Kansas, and she's interested in ACL injury, which is exactly what my research interest is as well. So she talked with me, and she also talked with another professor. So we decided to both co-chair her for her master journey, which I found has been very helpful for first year to start, like as a brand new assistant professor. And then she ended up successfully defend her thesis. And currently she's in PT school, which is also lots of students are interested in our exercise science field. Yep, so that's kind of like my first hire. And officially for doctoral students, I started to hiring 2 doctoral students in my second year. Similar to Stephanie, first year is really about building your labs and getting the equipment ready and getting things going on. And the first master students actually has me helped a lot in that progress. And when the doctoral students coming up, and they mainly was introduced by my previous colleagues. So that was lucky as well. And I had an opportunity to hire both during my second year. And then they started to take off and everything seems going very smooth. All right. Thank you.
Great, thanks. And then back to James.
Okay, so I'll just add a slightly different perspective based on what's already been shared. So when I started here, I started the typical cycle in August. My lab didn't exist at that point, so we had to renovate the space, do demolition. So it actually took about a year and a half for my lab to be constructed. And so the first person who joined my lab was a PhD student. He started August of my second year, so he was in his second year while we were building the lab. And about the same time, I also brought in a master's student and a postdoc just after the lab was completed. So when it comes to hiring, I just want to make clear for those who may not know, there are different ways you can bring in students depending on your institution type and your lab and department's structure. So for us at that time, my first PhD student was partially on a teaching assistantship, partially on a research assistantship that was funded from my startup. And then my postdoc was funded from those startup funds as well. Whereas the master student who started in my lab was not receiving support at that time, but was interested in getting research experience. So uh, when I talk about hiring, I'm speaking generally about just the people in your lab who may or may not be supported and may have support for different amounts of their time.
Great, thanks everyone. And good follow-up to this, to the first hire is how did you hire them? So I want to know what some effective ways that you've either found advantageous or things that haven't worked for you in terms of advertising for lab positions or to your potential candidates. And that I assume will be different depending on what type of institution and structure you have. So looking forward to hearing that. Um, I'm gonna pick at random, so I'm gonna have you go first for this one.
Sure. So for me, once like a similar experience, the first year I do not have a lab yet, so I didn't do any advertisement about what is existing, as long as it has been established. At first, actually in the progress, I reached out to our like marketing people, and they really helpful for like in terms of building a web page, like official one. At least I will be able to post it on the like under the university's official things, stuff like that. We also have a KU news, which is kind of like a public like media, like social media things, not exactly. And there we share our research studies, and we also post some like what's going on and what might be available for students. And that has been like very helpful. I definitely received a bunch of emails from both undergrad students and some like potential prospective master students to show their interest to be involved in the lab. I didn't do much in terms of LinkedIn or like like more official or maybe X regarding the hiring and the job positions. I also shared my like intention to recruit students with my previous supervisors as well as my colleagues I worked with. And if I feel like that could be an effective way to first start, because once you're a new like assistant professor, I'm not sure if I'm really value the quality as supposed to do. So I thought I could trust on someone else, like their mentorship before, so that could help me build up. This is also the way I recruit my two doctoral students come from, so I found it has been helpful. Yeah, thanks.
Great. How about Diego?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, ours is a little bit more of a targeted approach. So we typically try to identify students that perform relatively well in classes, including in biomechanics. Since we have like our research methods class and biomechanics, they take around the same time. If they, as part of one of their assignments, propose an interesting project that maybe aligns with the research we're doing in the lab, and then they show interest or capacity for research, We try to encourage them and recruit them to participate. And then similarly, if we get some grants to pay for students to be essentially employees in our lab, we typically either target against specific students we know will do a good job, or that show interest in participating in research.
Great. So targeted versus maybe a like broader call out. James, how about you? Anything different or new ways that you've thought about recruiting?
Sure. So I'll talk about sort of three different levels of recruiting. So postdocs. I've had three postdocs, and I believe each time those postdocs have come mostly through personal connection. So largely being me, getting a grant, emailing faculty who I know, because typically for a postdoc, I'm looking for someone with very specific skill set, and often where they are likely to come from based on the research that they or their PI is doing. So most of my postdocs have come through that route. For PhD students, I haven't that I can remember directly recruited PhD students because I'm a faculty member under three different programs at USC. Each of those programs typically has a large number of applicants. And as I think you said earlier, one of the first things I did when I started here was to make sure I had a website so that you're findable. I think even still today, I tell junior faculty that like you need to do that before you start, because that's where people are still going to find out the work that's done in a department. Um, and then I'll add just for undergraduate students, there have been several cases where I needed to recruit a sort of research assistant temporarily for some funded project. Maybe that was internal funding or a small external grant. We do work with virtual reality, for example, where we need computer scientists who can, write code, create sort of game-like applications. And there I would reach out to colleagues, excuse me, in cinematic arts, computer science, who taught courses relevant to that content, to ask if they knew students who might be interested in research. And then the last thing about my particular situation here, I'm on a medical campus, and our most of our undergraduate students are on a separate campus, which is we're in Los Angeles, so between a 20-minute and 50-minute commute, depending on the time of day. So that's something that I'm always considering when recruiting undergrads is, are they going to have the time and be committed to doing that commute, or can they do the work remotely?
That's a very good consideration. And we've had similar considerations in our lab, James. Similar on a medical campus away from undergrads, you definitely have to consider how committed are they to the commute, or can you make their work remote? Okay, and Stephanie, we'll get you in here as well.
Yeah. So I guess I would say postdocs, I've been similar to James in terms of that's usually if I have a funded project that I know specifically what I need, and then I'm doing a more targeted approach. The main thing I would add in terms of how I've gotten PhD students, so currently I have five and I have two more coming in the fall, and every single one of those has been kind of referred to me through someone, a friend of a friend, a network connection, someone who's been a past thesis committee member for me, whoever else. And I think especially in the first year or two, when you don't have your own um, I guess, kind of history of how you are as an advisor. Like nobody knows a lot about you and you're kind of a wild card. It's really key if you want to get good students who have a strong background or even any background in research, or if you're just looking for people who are going to come in with certain experience. I think being able to rely on people who know you as a student and can vouch for you is really important for just marketing yourself, because you're asking the students to take a big leap of trust in you and saying like, okay, I believe that she can figure out how to put a lab together and coordinate things and get projects running. So I think that was really key for me. As soon as I knew where I was going, I reached out to everyone that I knew who's in the Mid-Atlantic area, especially thinking about friends who are faculty at primarily undergrad institutions who have a lot of well-trained research students. So Bucknell, TCNJ, all sorts of schools around here. They've been really good resources in getting the first few students through the door. And then once you have one or two and they can go to conferences with you, ASB, BMES, whatever, like the students will start advertising for the lab and start bringing in people for the next rounds of recruits. But that's been pretty key for me.
Great. Yeah, thank you. It's nice to hear from all the different perspectives. And that also leads us nicely into the next question. So, more along the lines of how do you decide who to hire? So, what qualities do you assess when you are interviewing candidates? Do you base this most off of hard skills or specific research skills? I know that came up a bit with when you're looking specifically for postdocs, but also what sorts of soft skills are you looking for? Or degrees if you're looking for example for a PhD student that majored in undergrad in a specific area or things like that. And for this one, we'll get started with James first.
Okay, so my approach to interviewing and thinking about the qualities that I'm looking for in candidates has changed over the years, just based on the experience with hires along the way. So for me, and I'm going to speak specifically about postdocs and PhD students. For me, the first thing that I look for is a sense that their interest is specific to the work that I'm doing. At some point, you're likely to, get many emails from people who are interested in postdocs or PhDs, and it's clear that they haven't really done the due diligence to understand exactly what the work is in the lab. So, key things that I look for in those interviews are they referring to specific papers? Um, it's even better if they refer to specific papers and they say, "Oh, have you thought about doing, X, Y, and Z related to that line of research?" So, that's one of the first qualities. The second quality for me, and this is difficult to evaluate, for example, on the phone or via Zoom, but I think a lot about sort of how, we use this term fit loosely, but really I think about interpersonal skills. And that is, I think, best evaluated by speaking to their previous advisors. So one of the things that I think conveys limited information are letters of recommendation. So it's a standard part of applications. But I'll just kind of be frank, like often those letters are all very nice, right? They're always glowing about the applicant. And but it's best to just give a phone call to their advisor and ask direct questions about, what's most challenging about working with this person? Where do you think they have the greatest areas for growth and improvement, because you really want to get a sense of what those things are that you need to look out for when sign up to work with somebody for 2 or 5 years. After that, for me, is really the technical skills. That I haven't evaluated as systematically if I were starting over, I would do that much more systematically by essentially giving people various types of assignments. These days, 10 years ago, that was easy. Give somebody an assignment. They're likely to have done that maybe themselves. Nowadays, if it's programming related, you have to be very careful about how you evaluate their contribution to that solution. But I do still think it's important to evaluate if you need particular technical skills and you're assuming either that this person has a knowledge base or a skill set that's critical for the work, you need to have a systematic way to evaluate that. And yeah, and do that rigorously. Thank you. Stop there.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. And then I'll just popcorn around the rest. So maybe Diego next.
Yeah, so one of the things I typically do first, because we do work primarily with undergrad students, is just question them on their commitment. Because there are some students that, oh, I want to do research. Well, there's doing research and then there's just playing with the equipment in the lab, right? If you want to play with the equipment in the lab, that's not a problem. But if you want to do research, understand that it's not just, you come a few days, maybe a week, and then maybe, a few weeks in the semester. we're looking at a minimum a year, right? If we're starting with a new project, right? We got to go through IRB. You got to do your city training first before we do anything else, right? And so that usually kind of helps us, I don't want to say filter, but it kind of helps us identify, in this case, where we're going to place students in terms of the level of involvement. If they do show commitment, yes, I want to do this project. I think it's a great idea and I want to see it through, then obviously we support them as much as we can. But when we tell them, usually how much work it involves, if they aren't committed to that full process, then maybe just finding some tasks that they can help with in the lab. Because as we all know, right, research isn't a just, fun weekend project. It's a uh, significant time commitment, not just on their end, but also on our end as well.
Great, thank you. All right, next, maybe you.
Yeah. So perhaps I will start with undergraduate and master students. For those two levels, I did not have any specific requirements for the hard skills. It's really about like how much time you want to spend in the lab, as well as what is your goals. So for undergraduate students, it's like kind of like what Diego already mentioned. When they first involved, the first semester, like most of the time, it won't be a semester because they usually like reached out to me and showed their interest. I gave them a softer start and they could be involved and observe data collection sessions, and they see if they want to get hands-on experience and really like getting involved. If they consistently being involved, I think they definitely show their commitment. This is where we will be able, like, I would love to talk with them more and get them involved more in the following semester. So it's kind of like you have like a period of time to really have interaction with them. For master students, I think it's really about their interests and then what they wanted to do after graduate. If I could help and that part, I understand after graduate, like from your bachelor degree, you may not have that much experience of doing research. So I do not place a hard role on the hard skills. You have to do programming very well, something like that. So if our goals are aligned with each other very well and the candidate demonstrated good soft skills and good communicator with people. So I agree with James already shared early, and interpersonal skills, those are very important. And for the doctoral students, I think I will, during the interview progress, I will ask a little bit more questions in terms of hard skills, but those more touched on the like theory based. I won't give them like a quiz or some task you have to do. That's kind of add a little bit about the hard skills. I just want to make sure they have the fundamental. But other than that, I think my priority is still like relies more on the soft skills. Thanks.
Yeah, great, thank you. And then for the end of this question, can go with Stephanie.
Yep. So not to add any or not to repeat anything, hopefully. And I will mention we do actually also have undergrads. I realize I have not brought that up yet, but primarily within our lab, but the undergrads are all managed by individual grad students. We bring people in, try to keep them for a few years at a time. And so that's all kind of project by project. So I'll let everyone else that does more undergrad work stick to those comments probably. Major things that I tend to look for has shifted a little bit from the first people that came in. So right at the start, when I was bringing in the first, I would say 2 years worth of students, so 3 PhD students, I really wanted people who were super enthusiastic, were down to be starting up new projects. Like when I talked to them in interviews, they seemed very clear on, you're coming in, you're going to help me like decide where we're going. We're going to start some exciting stuff together, but there will be setup time and you're not walking into an established project. Like I wanted to make it very clear, that is the expectation, is that you're going to have so much ownership over this and it's going to be super cool, but is this a person whose personality is going to hold up well to the year and a half it took to get the load cell to work on the robot, that type of thing. Now that we've got some projects that are a little more mature, certainly, and more funded, I would say, I'm doing a little bit more targeted, bringing people in with expertise in ultrasound with an Achilles tendon if we need people to work on a project where that's going to be a key component. Thinking more about the hard skills now that we have really specific deliverables that we're working to on deadlines. I will say one thing that is a little bit different from others that I've talked to. So I'm situated in a super interdisciplinary setting, which I think most of us in the biomechanics realm can say that. But I certainly bring in people both through our biomedical engineering department and through our biomechanics and movement science department. I can be a mentor on a T32 for people with PT degrees. I've got a lot of flexibility there. And so it takes a little bit of mental scaling when you're thinking about, okay, am I hiring someone with a biochemistry undergrad degree coming in through the biomedical engineering program to work on a preclinical model versus am I bringing in someone with a master's in exercise science who knows this like physical performance realm well, but may not have the mechanics or the, chemistry, whatever. So being infinitely scalable and just kind of thinking through for this project, for this position, what are the needs? Is this person going to be appropriate for that need? And then at the end of the day, do I get along with them? I do think that's still the number one thing to me is if I feel like, oh my God, that was such a painful hour-long phone call that I just had with that person, I probably don't want to spend 5 years having weekly meetings with them. So, like, I like the people I work with is kind of the end all be all for me.
Can I add one point now that in response to what Stephanie shared? So one thing that I guess we haven't really discussed is once you have a group, there's a group dynamic, both interpersonally, but also with respect to their knowledge base and skill set. So one of the things that I've tried to do over the years, which is again what I picked up from Stephanie's point here, was build a team that has a variety of skills. So, you know, if a computer science student, a physical therapist, somebody within BME, and in addition to them doing their projects, that mix of perspective is also really great when you're trying to generate ideas for future projects or even get feedback on what your any given student is doing. So that's something that I have always valued and continue to value at the team level is can we ensure that we don't have sort of a single point of view or framing when we're thinking about the research we're doing and what we want to do in the future.
Yeah, James, I think that's such an excellent point, and I'm gonna skip a question, go to the next one because I think it kind of wraps into what you were talking about. And gonna ask how people are adjusting their management and mentoring styles for different personnel. Right, so we have different expertise levels from the undergrad all the way up to a postdoc, maybe. We have different disciplines that you could be hiring for all in the same lab, and then each of those people come with their own personalities. Right. So I'm gonna tag you for this first one.
Yeah, so I found that like adjusting mentoring style is not only about the personality. I think it's really I like depends on matching the level of the structure to the training stage, as well as the level of the responsibilities they are ready to do. So first, when I started, I have been more like directive. So I give them like for someone who's new to the lab, I give more like instructions, especially for undergraduate and master students. We went through the data collection together, have one-on-one meetings during our first meeting toward the lab, and then provide very clear, like I think consistent and clear protocol and the instructions, as well as expectations. That has been helpful. And later on, once they gain experience, and that could also happen like early stage for doctoral students, they already had experience. I shifted towards more about independency, which like master students and doctoral students, they are encouraged to lead a project, and they will mainly work work with undergraduate students. Each of them will be assigned with several undergraduate students they could work on. And from there, they learn some, like, they gain like interpersonal skills, also get some like decision making in their process. But we definitely also like kind of throw weekly meeting to check in and make sure we're on the right track. So once the progress is really helping them to gain independence, and it's also not automatically coming there, is more about we planning for there, and that is our goal. So I think that also delegates to the responsibilities when you match the students and like assign undergrad students to a project and ask them to work closely with a doctoral student or a master's student. I think it's also you kind of tell them what is your responsibilities. If your job you started with majoring about data collection, or if you involved both like data collection as well as data processing a little bit. The key is really about helping them to getting independent like gradually, in the progress, rather than like assume they're good and just let them go.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I'm gonna have Stephanie go next on this one.
Cool. Yeah, so I think my main approach has been honestly a large part of this, especially the more people join the lab, the more I'm realizing like a lot of it is how do you maintain your own sanity when you're managing more than like two people? Because when there are only two people in the lab, you can keep eyes on everyone. Like they can only go so far and you can keep eyes on everyone. And everyone can get to you at any point in time. Now, if I have, in the fall, if I've got seven people, seven PhDs and a postdoc, I cannot keep eyes on every direction all the time. So one of my big things has been starting some degree of structure, implementing that with everyone, and then seeing how people adapt to it. So I also have 1 hour a week for anyone that's a graduate student or a postdoc in the lab. Everyone gets their one independent, like you have 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. on Mondays, and that's your protected time with me. If that means that you need to sit down and talk with me for an hour and like look through data every week, that's great. If it is you're pretty senior at this point, you really just need me to actually focus and go review a paper for you for an hour, like tell me that that's what that hour needs to be this week. Um, Starting out, I do structure it as just kind of one-on-one meetings, keeping track of things. I have everyone fill out a Google document, again, mostly for my own sanity, where it kind of goes over major things I was working on last week, my plans for this week, any questions that have come up that I want to make sure we hit on in the meeting. And then there's a little table at the top that has like long-term semester goals. This is what my PhD advisor did with me. It worked well for him. I figured I would copy it if it worked well. And I think it's turned out pretty nicely. I would say everyone kind of merges around how much they like that document or don't. Some people tag in all of their data and it's all super centralized. Some people just fill in, here are the major bullet points of things I did last week, things I'm planning this week. It gives us something to talk about. It makes sure that we don't kind of drop things week to week. So that level of structure has been really helpful, especially as your lab grows. I think that's really key to not lose track of people. That being said, I'm one of the biggest challenges, I would say, is figuring out when you're moving individual students that might be super type A or super not type A, whatever else, through all of the really key milestones. So getting PhD students through their qual and through, we're coming up on my first students' proposals and defenses and that type of thing. I will say that's one of the most interesting challenges to learn how to adapt to on the fly is figuring out if a student is a lot like me and I know how I would be addressing something, then that's really straightforward for me to mentor. If I have a student that does not have, paper calendars floating around on their desk with like long-term thoughts and plans, then, figuring out how to be one step ahead of or at least holding hands with while they go through it has been one of the things that I've had to adapt my mentorship style based on which student I'm dealing with. But overall, I think just keeping that really open structure where there's a lot of communication at least gets you out ahead of a lot of the problems, even if it is identifying things you have to kind of learn on the fly.
Great. And you all are touching on like different parts of different questions that we have, but at least get through our panel for this question, and then we can like jump onto some other ones that we've touched on already so far. So I'm gonna Diego go next for this question on the management and mentoring style.
Yeah, so I'm a little bit more involved since I primarily work with undergraduate students. So typically, if a student has an idea for a project that they feel a little more comfortable with managing, I'm just there in more of a supportive role. But many of the other students are maybe working on projects that have already begun. They're either in progress or we're starting a new project. And so they don't feel as confident. And even though they may have already done 10, 15, 20 data collections, they still want me there to provide just basically support, which I have no problem doing. And so what I typically try to do is have at least one student who is the student lead and then have another student who supports them during the research project. It's been helpful in case, say, the student who's in lead cannot be there for whatever reason, that there's still someone else that can still provide support if someone else then needs to step in as well. And luckily, I haven't had any issues so far with students because, again, as I mentioned earlier, um, many of our students who participate in research are on athletics, and so they kind of already know how to work with teammates, and many of them come from the same athletic team, so they're already kind of bonded and share a lot of everything, secrets and things of that nature. So it kind of facilitates my responsibility a little bit because I'm basically just there to provide them support with the data collection, data processing, and my supervision is just basically making sure nothing goes wrong and being the responsible adult if something does go wrong. So they do get a little bit more autonomy, especially after a few data collections.
Great. And then James, I'm gonna tag you and then kind of segue into our next question too. So you'll be the top end or the bottom and the top of this next.
All right, so to maybe finish up this question about mentoring, adjusting mentoring styles, I'll say that when I started in this role, I sort of had this view that I had a mentoring style and structure, and you join the lab and you just sort of adapt to that structure, and everybody get the same, it's the same thing. And then, of course, found out that that doesn't really work, particularly as the group grows and you start to really understand the factors that influence how individual people progress through a PhD. And I'll talk specifically about PhD students for this question. Um, so I just sort of jotted down a few things that differ among students that are critical to success in a PhD. We've already talked about time management loosely. Different people arrive with different degrees of ability and to manage their own time when you get into this independent part of the PhD. Critical thinking, right? This ability to take information that you read, take data that you get, and really think through what you can and can't conclude from that data and what you should do next. That differs across people. Communication skills, both oral and written, and then just your knowledge base, so how much you know about your field. And so a lot of the individual mentoring has to do with, okay, in with these sets of skills that I think are important, where are different people, where are their strengths, in which case you just sort of let them go, and then what are the areas where you really need to help them develop over the long run. So that's really how I try to tailor my mentoring. And then the last piece to that is really about that the like frequency of communication. I know we're going to get to this a little bit, but yeah, some people you can sort of leave for multiple weeks and they come back and they've either had a plan, they stuck to it, and they'll show you what they did. Other people just need more routine interaction or feedback. And I'm a big Slack user, uh, and everybody knows that the quickest way to get a response from me is to send me a figure and an interpretation or in a question. So I'm a data first person. Um, and so, yeah, so that facilitates the different time scale of interaction across students. Some people do that regularly, some don't. And then I give feedback if I feel like it needs to change based on progress.
Great, thank you. So we'll stick with you, James, and then if you have more to add for this question. So I know there's been a lot of overlap, but more specifically, like what strategies you would use for delegating responsibilities or project objectives within the group, either in terms of like assigning lab equipment roles to specific people or within data collection or mentoring and supervising other trainees.
Um, yes, I'm interested to hear how other people, currently managing their groups. So I'll say at a high level, what I've observed over the years across different PIs is that people have different like structures of their lab. So in some cases there are, projects have a team, and that team is sort of hierarchical. That typically is something you see in really big labs. I have what I would call a really flat structure. So each student, PhD student, postdoc has their project. There may or may not be overlap with other people's projects. And so people are mostly independent with respect to their project. Uh, Now, what I've learned over the years that that doesn't scale, right? So this time last year, I was managing a bunch of different projects that were all independent, and it's really time consuming. It's challenging. It's exciting in the sense that like if your brain works like mine, you like to be have your hands in lots of different things, and it sort of keeps you interested. But at some point, you reach a limit to your depth of knowledge if you go too broad. So that I always sort of warn junior faculty against doing that. Um, and so with respect to delegation, really everybody's kind of responsible for their own project. I try to get every PhD student and postdoc some experience directly mentoring somebody else as more of a training experience, right? I don't necessarily, I've come to this point where, for example, with undergraduate students, because of the nature, like I said earlier, of where we are, they often are not here long enough to sort of make your job easier as a PhD student or a postdoc. Um, and so I try to make sure that's not how people look at having undergraduates involved. Like we're actually training them. Like this is part of the job, and it's necessary to develop the next generation of researchers. So that's typically how I've organized my lab and managed that delegation. More recently, our work has become a little bit more concentrated, and I'm trying to move toward a sort of team-based project model so that I can scale the lab up over the next couple years here.
Great, thank you. That was very helpful. And then maybe we can jump to Diego.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, mine's a little more unique because I primarily work with undergraduate students. So typically, what we try to do is figure out what they're comfortable with, either with certain equipment, whether it's they're more comfortable processing, say, motion capture data, or if maybe they are just more comfortable providing assistance in the data collection. And so, what I truly try to do initially is just trying to gauge like how comfortable they are with using certain equipment. With the data processing, because our students don't necessarily get as much time to learn how to process a lot of the data, I usually just write the MATLAB code to handle all that stuff so that it's just a little bit easier to move the project along. But then I also have the students then, after I've processed the data, now come back in, also analyze the results to see, okay, do we come to the same conclusion? Because as James mentioned, right, we want them to still develop, right, their skill set. And so I don't do everything for them, but I do kind of maneuver the part that might take them much longer than the time that they actually have to do things, so that it kind of facilitates moving on to the next step. And then, um, as I mentioned earlier, I try to provide as much uh, supervision and facilitation as I can for them, given just kind of where they are in terms of their maturation and development as researchers. But for the most part, most of our students, as I mentioned earlier, they really once they get started, you can see how excited they get, and they want to keep going. And so, uh, right, if you have students who are committed, I think it makes delegating a little bit easier because it's just they kind of do it themselves. They figure out schedules, and so it's just supporting them, really.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And then next I'll jump to you.
Yep. I work with the doctoral students very closely. We have our weekly meetings set it up, and they're also housing in their office is housing in the lab. So they do have access to the lab all the time if they want. Through there, I create a lab calendar so that once there is a like data collection session or touring or everything going on, everyone involved in the lab will be able to see, and I don't have to be physically being there to know what's going on. And we also have students like all levels sign up if they will be available to help individual sessions. So I kind of check those what's going on in the lab to help me monitor the data collection progress. But I do not really like ask that much. And usually it really depends on subjects schedule and our doctoral students availabilities. So from there, mostly it's mainly depending on the goals they give me. So early during the semester, they will share what is their goal for this semester, as well as like long-term wise for that year. So we know where we want to process for that specific project, because each doctoral students, they lead at least a project, and we get a sense of it. We're usually checking during mid of the semester if they're making progress and if we need to speed up or we're ahead of the schedule. That has been helpful. And undergraduate students, they work closely with doctoral students, so they always kind of under the supervision of them. So for data collection, they have doctoral students back them up, and we did not I don't need to worry about if something happening outside of the scope or what gonna happens. If there is a relatively high risk studies, such as working with patient right after the surgery, I will make sure to be there just to follow the like it's like they should have enough like experience for doctoral students to work independently, but at least the first several subjects I want to make sure everything is going well, and try to identify if there is any possible like risky we may like didn't like notice, and if we see some potential, so we will try to avoid it, otherwise they're like off to go. So lab calendar is a big part, and communication is a big part as well.
Awesome. Thank you. And then for the final person for this question, I'll jump to Stephanie.
Yeah, so I think what I will add to not kind of go back over what some other people have been saying, I'll talk a little more about the kind of nuts and bolts responsibilities. So, one of the biggest changes from being a first year faculty to being currently fourth year, is when you are a first year and you haven't recruited anyone, you are responsible for doing literally everything that ever happens. Every package that comes in, you're signing out every safety meeting you need to go to, every building thing, every time someone has to present in an undergrad class, it's all you. One of the very fun things is once you have people besides yourself in the lab, you can start delegating that. And I think what ended up happening, so the first couple of students, like at first it's you and two other people and they know less than you do. Um, a big thing for me was prioritizing what I needed to offload in order to successfully keep the lab running. So thinking about, there's a safety committee that someone from every lab in the department has to have someone on the committee. It's mostly grad students. They just call into a meeting every month. It's not mentally that taxing and it does not need to be me. Someone can just tell me what happened. But it was a huge thing that was just taking up a block on my schedule. So that is one of the first things that moved off as soon as I had grad students that could do it. I have a webmaster as one of the lab jobs, and like a lot of this breaks down to within the lab at the start of every semester, we assess, okay, everyone in the lab, what is your lab job? Are you safety master, webmaster? Um, what else do we have? Someone that coordinates the lab meeting schedule, someone who keeps track of all the shared resources in the lab, the 3D printers, keeping things stocked, who is the package getter, for lack of a better term. So I think that's been a really big thing. And really what I found helpful was to prioritize which of these tasks, even if it's not actually that difficult, is it just the chore that I hate doing the most and it will get me the most mental space to find someone else to do it. And then making sure that you're regularly communicating and that there's clear documentation if that's relevant for when it passes between different students of whoever's in charge of the lab website needs to know where the username and password are and if there are resources for how to set it up. So for those type of tasks, I find, just building out more and more kind of documentation or pass on of roles, that type of thing has been helpful.
Great. Well, thank you all. We're getting close to the top of the hour, so I want to make sure we're respectful for people's times. I have to leave at the top of the hour, and then we'll stop the recording and go to more of an open question answer for those that can hang out with us. And we have some additional moderated questions if the questions from the audience kind of dull. But for those that are here and we're here for the hour, we thank you. And special thanks to our panelists for giving us insights to the grand structure of how you build your research team, all the way from the undergrad structured or centered, all the way up to the high level large labs. So thank you, everyone.